Hi, I'm James Hancock, and today I'm going to talk to you about the nuclear renaissance. Today everybody's focusing on reducing their carbon footprint and greenhouse gas emissions, whether it be the automotive industry, switching to hybrids, or the electrical industry and alternatives such as wind, solar, and hydro. Well, today I want to offer up another alternative of nuclear power. And according to MIT, 40% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions come from electrical generation. So nuclear power would be a great alternative. And the nuclear power industry today isn't the same industry it was yesterday. Everyone thinks of Chernobyl and 3 Mile Island, but today it's a safe, reliable, and viable option for greener production of electricity. So why is this shift to nuclear necessary? Well, according to John Dutch of MIT, in a joint study done in the U.S., 90% of carbon emissions from electrical generation come from coal-fired generation plants, even though coal-fired generation plants account for only 52% of the electricity produced. And taking nuclear power off the table as a viable alternative will prevent the global community from achieving long-term gains in the control of carbon dioxide emissions. More or less what he's saying is, the way coal-fired plants, which the majority of what we generate comes from coal-fired plants, produce most of the emissions. And replacing the coal-fired plants alone with nuclear plants will reduce the emissions of carbon dioxide by 90%. And according to the EPA, in a study they did, 95,805,693.5 tons of carbon dioxide are generated each year in Georgia alone, just from electrical generation. And 2,696,209,203 tons of carbon dioxide are generated each year in the U.S. from electrical generation. Now, taking John Dutch's numbers, saying that 90% of emissions come from coal-fired plants, and replacing those coal-fired plants with nuclear plants would bring the carbon dioxide emissions in the U.S. down from 2,696,209,203 tons to 296,629,20 tons of carbon dioxide. And that's a significant reduction and a great start. But another reason for the switch to nuclear is government regulations. The government has really started to crack down on carbon regulations, and in Europe right now, believe it or not, the price per ton of carbon dioxide emitted is actually cheaper than in the U.S. According to James Cantor of the IEEE, the price to emit a ton of carbon dioxide in Europe is currently $18.41, and he expects this price to double or triple in the coming years. And right now, the price, according to Bill Sweet of the IEEE, to emit a ton of carbon dioxide in the U.S. is $25, and it's capped right there. So that's the highest it can go right now. But he also expects this price to rise in the coming years. And this just illustrates that current fossil fuel plants output a large portion of the greenhouse gases that are emitted in the world. So what can be done to curb this output and bring it down? Well, we can switch over to nuclear power. And nuclear power, while some people fear its waste, the amount of waste that is outputted is infinitesimally small. According to the Department of Energy, nuclear power produces around 2,000 metric tons per annum of spent fuel. And this more or less amounts to 6/1000ths of a pound per megawatt hour. Now, comparatively, according to the Department of Energy, 1 megawatt hour generated from coal-fired plants yields 2,249 pounds of carbon dioxide. So, comparing 6/1000ths of a pound to 2,249 pounds, it's pretty obvious to see that nuclear emits a tiny, tiny portion of waste. And that waste can even be cut down by reprocessing the spent fuel. And according to Fairley of the IEEE, the spent fuel can be reprocessed, and that can bring the 6 pounds per megawatt hour, or 6/1000th of a pound per megawatt hour, down even farther. And nuclear power is a fiscal alternative. According to the National Energy Institute, the average fuel cost for nuclear plants, the total for nuclear plants is 45/100ths of a cent per kilowatt hour, and the average cost for kilowatt hour of electricity from a coal plant is 1.36 cents, and natural gas is 3.44 cents per kilowatt hour. So the fuel costs for nuclear energy are greatly cheaper, 3 times cheaper. And according to Bill Sweet of the IEEE, since fuel costs account for only 2 to 4% of the cost of nuclear energy, that if we did switch over to nuclear energy totally, and the demand for the fuel went up, then despite the demand going up, the price of electricity generated from nuclear generation would not be a significant increase because it's only 2 to 4%. So it would have a minor impact, which means lower bills for you. And nuclear energy is obviously a viable and green fiscal alternative, but what does all this mean for you? Well, there's some direct and indirect benefits, and I'll start off with the direct benefits. Cheaper electricity per kilowatt hour. That's been shown through fuel costs, but the total production cost of electricity per kilowatt hour, and that includes, the production, which would be building the plant, which is a huge cost, generation, which is your daily cost, and decommission, which most people don't think of. At the end of a nuclear plant's life, it has to be decommissioned in a special way, and that costs some money. But even with all those costs built in, the total cost for a kilowatt hour generated from a nuclear plant is 4 cents per kilowatt hour, according to Morgan. And some people say, well, why don't we do solar? Well, the total cost for solar is 22 cents per kilowatt hour, and that only includes production. The typical cost, just generating costs of nuclear would be very, very low. And obviously, another direct benefit of going nuclear would be the decrease in greenhouse gases. A nuclear plant emits 0 greenhouse gases compared to coal or even natural gas. There are also indirect benefits. Right now, there's a big push for natural gas plants, but that's largely superficial because natural gas plants only add to capacity, and they aren't really used to replace a coal plant to generate on peak hours. At peak demand, when there needs to be an increased capacity, they will fire up a natural gas plant, but they will not decommission a coal plant and run a natural gas plant in its place. And for you, replacing the natural gas and coal plants with nuclear, that would mean a decrease in the demand for natural gas, which would mean lowering your natural gas prices, which is nice come winter and, for your pocketbook. And what can you do to help push the U.S. into a nuclear renaissance? Well, you can talk to your politicians and tell them to consider nuclear policies, and remember that nuclear is a safe and viable alternative. And also write your congressman, and maybe consider, when someone's running for an office, their stance on this. Just remember that the nuclear industry is not the same industry as it was, Chernobyl. Everyone thinks Chernobyl and 3 Mile Island, but it's not the same industry it was in the past, and it's a safer and viable alternative. And don't think of the nuclear industry, as producing 3-eyed fish and, scenes from The Simpsons. Remember that the industry has progressed to a safe and viable alternative.